Hello, you're very welcome to what will be the last Trust and Tira talk of 2021. My name is Liam Shorthall. This evening's talk is entitled The Culleens Ambush by Frank Fagan. This ambush took place just 11 days before the truce in the War of Independence. Frank, through his work as a volunteer in the Jackie Clarke Collection, has become fascinated by the extraordinary local stories and experiences from the Irish Revolution, and as a practicing psychotherapist and former tutor with the National University of Ireland, has a particular interest in the legacy and aftermath of conflict in a small rural area. Frank, you're very welcome to Trust and Tira. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Liam. Okay, tonight I'm going to speak about the Culleens ambush. One of the reasons why I became interested in this particular ambush was that very few people wanted to speak to me about it, and I had a sense that it was perhaps something that was a sensitive topic in the area. The other thing that struck me was a lot of local people didn't actually know about it either. So I'm very interested in how things are remembered from the War of Independence and the Civil War, and also how some things are maybe not remembered. This book in particular I have found very helpful in my research, by Rebecca Graff McRae, and I think it just captures, the sense of memory from a traumatic period in our history. This is a quote from the book, and I just think that for me it's sorry. Okay, so if you can see that quote there.
Yeah, we can see that, Frank.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so I'm interested in the remembering, the forgetting, and the rewriting. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. I found this recently, and this there's a reference to the Culleens ambush in this article. So this is almost 60 years after the ambush took place. So this article was printed in 1980. And it's about Banda Burka, who was a member of Commemoration. And it says here that after the famous Culleens ambush, she was arrested while teaching in the school for carrying dispatches. She spent 9 months in Kilmainham jail. This was her longest period behind bars, and she had been jailed briefly on other occasions. On her release from Kilmainham, there was some question about her return to the local school, but the parents of her pupils insisted on her reappointment. Okay, so we can see here from her pension application became available to view there just a couple of weeks ago, and we can see here that she mentions her carrying dispatches for the Culleens ambush. Okay, but she also mentions here something that happened in September 1922, and it was the killing of a Republican, Paul Fagan, who was killed by Free State forces in Beltra, County Sligo, and she was there on the day, and she helped to remove his body from, he was shot dead in a car. So she removed the ammunition and that he was carrying, and while the Free State Army were raiding in the area. You can also see here that when they got his remains to a stable, she actually prepared the remains for the coffin herself, and she was left alone in the stable. And she says here that she wasn't discovered at the work, but she was discovered then subsequently when the coffin came, and she was arrested. Okay, so here we have an account of the killing in Beltra, and it tells us here that they had one man killed. Okay, so she was arrested then on the 2nd of April 1923, and then she was interned until the 1st of August 1923. She was released from the North Dublin Union, and she had been in the hospital for 6 weeks at that stage. Okay, so we then see that it was actually 1925 that she was dismissed with other teachers for complicity with the irregulars. So her husband was a volunteer, and he had been present at the Culleens ambush. She was also after her release, she was present and she was on the stage with Valera when he appeared in Ennis later on that month. She tells us in her own account that she was on the platform, and she acted almost like a human shield, and she was struck a number of times by rifle butts and knocked off the stage. She also mentions that an armoured car was in the square and it opened fire above the heads of those present. And there's the armoured car on the left. You won't be surprised to hear that after all her valiant service, she wasn't entitled to a pension. And this is the letter that she received in 1943 to say that she wasn't pension. I just need to declare my interest here in this. This is my grandfather, Gerald Toole. He was a Republican prisoner in Carlow Jail, Wicklow Jail, and the Curragh. He died when I was 16. My other grandfather, Thomas Fagan, was a member of Jeepney 1st Battalion Dublin Brigade, and he died before I was born, but he took part in the burning of the Custom House. So my grandfathers never met, but they had one thing in common, and that was that they rarely, if ever, spoke about their experiences during this period. So I like this quote. This is from Rebecca Graf McRae's book as well. And for me, I need to be mindful of this given my own family's history. One would expect people to remember the past and imagine the future. But in fact, when discoursing or writing about history, they imagine it in terms of their own experience. And when trying to engage the future, they cite supposed analogies from the past, till by a double process of repetition, they imagine the past and remember the future. Okay, so this is Jackie Clarke. He was from 1927 to 2000. He was a local businessman in Ballina and a life Republican. So he amassed a collection of over 100,000 Irish historical items, and the collection itself is just breathtaking. It was bequeathed to the town of Ballina on his death. So he had, in his lifetime, he would have known men and women who had participated in the War of Independence and the Civil War. And he also knew the importance of collecting the stories and the memorabilia from that period. I've been a volunteer there since 2016. And it's just the most incredible place for anybody who's interested in Irish history. So there's a vast collection of photographs, political pamphlets, posters, local photographs of local people from all the decades. He has a huge amount of material from the Republican campaign in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. Okay, so this is Michael Tolan. I'd never heard of Michael Tolan until I started volunteering on the Jackie Clarke Collection. He was a local volunteer, and just to give you an idea of what the War of Independence was like in Ballina, he was taken into custody by Crown forces in May of 1921, and while being transferred from Ballina to Galway, he was murdered in a bog and his legs were cut off. This is a section of a mural that was unveiled in Ballina on the centenary of his arrest. Okay, so this statue is a statue in Bahola. And I noticed this a couple of years ago. So I was running a workshop for people who were interested in the War of Independence and the Civil War and how to use the Military Archives website. So we had 8 people who were coming to the workshop. And what I suppose what astounded me was that 3 of them, their grandfathers were RIC men. So I needed a case study to show them who were attending how to use the material that was available. So when I looked at the case of Willie Moran, I could see that there were 2 other cases connected with him. So it was a perfect example of how to use the archives. So what happened in his case was that on the day following the shelling of the forecourts, a group of Republicans in Kilchermock went to arrest the Ruan brothers who had joined the Free State Army and were recruiting local men for the Free State Army. They were working in the family's pub and shop, and when the Republicans entered armed, within a couple of minutes, there were shots fired. One man was killed instantly. One of the Ruans was mortally wounded and died 5 days later, and the other Ruan was badly wounded, but he survived. So when I was telling my colleagues in the Jackie Clarke, they asked me the name of the people. So when I said Ruan, they mentioned about a fire that had taken place in Kilchimock 22 years later. So I immediately became interested in this, and it was the same premises where the shooting had taken place. So the man who had survived the shooting died in the fire along with most of his family. But there was one 2-year-old baby was saved from the fire. He was thrown from an upstairs window and he was caught by a person downstairs on the footpath. So I discovered he was still alive. So he was like 76. So I made contact with his wife and I went to visit him. And I wanted to ask him about the, what he knew about the shooting of his father, of what he had been told. But I knew that he would also speak to me about the fire. So that's Pat Ruan. And I spent, myself and my colleague Sinead spent 2.5 hours with the kitchen listening to what he knew about what had happened during the Civil War. So he's holding a medal there that his father was awarded for action in 1916. So the only man who was awarded a 1916 medal for action in Mayo. Meeting Pat, it really influenced my interest in oral history and memory, and also that the memory of trauma. So 5 weeks after I took this photograph, Pat died. And his daughter told me that this was the photograph that they put on his coffin. So once again, when I get an opportunity to meet somebody like Pat, time is of the essence, and I just need to do my homework before I visit. Okay, now what really made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up was that I visited the site of the fire. And this was 74 years after the fire on the main street in Kilchimock. And it looked like the fire had happened the day before. And there's no plaque to say that anybody had died here, let alone 10 people. So that yellow wall, that would have been the front of the house, and you can see the remains of the back wall there. And that's from the rear. So even I spoke to local people who didn't know anything about the fire or anything about the shooting that had happened on that site. Okay, so the very fact that people don't talk about something, it doesn't mean that, it sort of goes away. So here's another man that I met recently. This is Plunkett Doherty. Plunkett is holding a photograph that's 99 years old. The photograph was taken during the Civil War in Sligo. This is an incredible photograph. These are extremely rare. So this photograph was in the possession of Plunkett's uncle, and his uncle was working life in England, and he had this photograph hidden because he felt that he could be prosecuted if he was found, if it was found in his possession. So that's his father there at the back. Okay, so his father was driving the car when Paul Gagan was shot dead. And the man here, this is Brian McNeill. So Brian McNeill was killed in disputed circumstances on Ben Bulben in 1922. Now, so I've done an essay on the ambush itself, and it's a detailed study of what happened. And the essay is available if you just Google Culleens ambush, Jackie Clarke Collection. You'll get a link to the entire essay. Okay, so the essay begins 97 years after the event, and it works back to the 1st of July. So hopefully you'll get an understanding of how events unfolded and how over the course of time The memory of that day was preserved by a small number of families who were directly impacted. And this is something that I come across over and over again. Okay, so in the days after the ambush was reported widely in local newspapers and national newspapers as well. Okay, this one here is quite good. It tells us that at one stage the group of IRA men were surrounded on three sides, and this is what I would have been told by the son of one of the men who was there. The most detailed account of the ambush was given in the Irish Times a couple of days afterwards, and that would be the closest to what I discovered as well. Okay, so what happened? So upwards of 30 men were involved in setting up the ambush. 2 from the group carry out an armed robbery on the pub and shop in order to draw the RIC out of the barracks. So once the owner's son leaves to report the robbery, the deadly trap is set and the unit divide into 2 groups to prevent escape. So the idea was that when the lead members of the patrol arrived at the pub and shop, that the firing would start. So they were in position for a long time, and when one of the groups could see, they were in a position up, where they could see for about 1.5 miles, and then they could see the first of the cycle patrol arrive. And in the words of Matt Kilcawley, who was second in command that day, "We waited, we lay low, and they came in as the Angelus rung." So the RIC were in extended formation, and when the firing started when the first 2 got to the pub. Okay, so they got off their bikes and they jumped into a ditch and returned fire, but they were completely overwhelmed and surrendered shortly after. So the remainder of the patrol escaped. One of them was badly wounded and he was left where he fell on the road. Okay. So a car drove by in the middle of the ambush and one of the RIC men jumped on it and headed back towards Sligo. So he managed to get some alert reinforcements. So the volunteers now headed for a bullring close to the road with their 2 prisoners, their bikes and weapons. So they hadn't traveled very far when they came under fire from a long distance. So then this began a frantic chase as the men tried to get back to their base in the mountains. So with the arrival of further reinforcements, which were visible in the distance, the volunteers took the decision to kill both of the RIC men. So you need to be aware that there were hundreds of people cutting turf. Men, women, and children witnessed these events. It was the 1st of July. It was a beautiful summer's day. Okay, so a running gun battle ensued until dusk that evening. The volunteers knew every inch of the bogs and the mountains, and it was this that saved them. So the 2 groups made it to the safety of their dugouts near to Ballina, and there were no casualties on the IRA side. Okay, so this is a map of Sligo. So we're looking at this area here. We're looking at West Sligo. Okay, so this is the barracks here that the cycle patrol left from. Okay, so this is the main road from Sligo town to Ballina. Okay, so they travel. I think it's a distance of about 6 miles or something. Okay, and it's very hilly in that. So this is where the reinforcements came from Eastkey. Okay, this was the first day that I was brought up to the site where the 2 men were killed. Okay, so the man on the left is Martin John Dolphin. His father, so it's the same families have the same stretch of bog for generations. Okay, so his father was 8 years of age on that day and he witnessed everything. Okay, so what really made, I was really amazed. So right beside him here, this is there's a 6-foot square of bog where the 2 bodies lay, and the turf hasn't been cut there for almost a century. And for 80 years, there was nothing to mark the fact that the 2 men were killed there. There was a plaque placed there about 15 or 20 years ago. But as you can see, the bog is about 1.5 meters higher there in that section where the 2 bodies lay. So there again, you can see it there beside John. Okay. And once again, that's it. And you can just see it's a very, very remote area. Okay, so he was explaining to me there that what happened when the Crown forces discovered the two bodies, that they opened fire and they killed a number of ponies and donkeys that the local people were using to draw the turf. So I've only brought two people up there. I brought my wife up to the site, and I brought the artist in residence from the Jackie Clarke Collection, and she just found this very, very powerful place to visit. And she recently did two paintings which were on exhibition in the museum. Okay, so this is from the brigade activity report, and this mentions the ambush. So what we can see from here is that there were 70 men involved in total. So the most detailed account of the ambush in Ernie O'Malley's book. So he interviews a local man here, Matt Kilcawley, and the interview took place 30 years after the ambush. So he's talking here about the ambush. So he says, when we were being fired on, we asked what we could do with our prisoners. So we had a short council of war, and we decided to shoot them. We gave them a short few seconds in which to say their prayers. King pleaded hard for mercy. He made all kinds of promises, and we would have liked to let the other RIC man go free. He was younger. He pleaded hard and he cried and again pleaded with us. The others would have heard the shots, so the reinforcements. They were not dead then. King could say, Enniscrone. They got up the parish priest, but by that time the two of them were dead. That's Matt Kilcawley. That's him there. And this photograph was taken in Bleak Castle during the Second World War. I think a number of the men here were involved in the ambush. This man definitely was. That's Dennis Sheeran. So he was a senior Republican in the town. And I got this photograph from his son. Okay, so this is the Court of Inquiry file. And the Court of Inquiry into the killing of Constable Thomas Higgins and John King was carried out the following day. And it was carried out in the very barracks that the two men had left from the day before. Okay, so the first witness was Sergeant Michael Healy. So part of his statement, he says, I am Sergeant in charge of Dromore West Police Barracks. At 10:30 a.m. on July the 1st, Thomas Tuffy of Culleens reported here at the police barracks that two unknown men armed with revolvers entered his father's shop at Culleens and demanded the cash box, which contained £261, and took it away. I at once turned out two sergeants and 5 constables. The two deceased were in front. When we got close to Culleens, we were ambushed. I did not see the two deceased again until their bodies were brought into the barracks last evening. Second witness, I was very surprised to see his name there, District Inspector W.E. White. 5 weeks before the Culleens ambush, there had been an attempt on his life in Ballina, and in the morning after the attack on him, a young member of the IRA from Enniscrone was shot dead by the RIC in Ballina. Okay, so this is the medical, this is the doctor's evidence at the Court of Inquiry, and he just explains about, you know, the injuries that both men received and the number of bullets. And then we have Constable James Hoy was the last one to give evidence, and his evidence, he says, I produced the bullet which I found in the clothing of Constable John King when I was undressing the body. From the marks on the bullet, it had evidently passed through his body. This was about 8:30 p.m. on July 4th, 1921. Okay, so this is a report on the attack on District Inspector White, and also it gives the name of Thomas Howley, who was shot dead. And this is Thomas Howley's headstone in Enniscrone Cemetery. He's not actually buried here, But this headstone, there was a committee formed to get a headstone for him and a volunteer, local volunteer who was killed in the Civil War. So this was unveiled on Easter Sunday, 1930. And that's a photograph of 18-year-old Thomas Howley. So within the military service pensions collection, there are 29. Actually, there's more than 29 now, because every time we have more pension applications released, we get more references to it. But one of the most interesting is the one submitted by Edward Gilday from Enniscrone. He had served in the British Navy from 1913 until March 1920. He joined the IRA in his return to Sligo in April 1920. So he provided invaluable arms training to the local volunteers. And here we have the pension application in his own hand he sent in 1935. So this is from the Military Archives website. During the conflict, as well as providing training and instruction for the IRA, he states that he took part in the burning of Enniscrone Barracks and Courthouse, the attack on Enniscrone Coast Guard Station in 1920, and an attack on an RIC patrol at Culleens, which developed into a larger fight as the IRA unit retreated towards the Ox Mountains from British reinforcements. Gilday claims that he personally shot 2 of the members of the initial RIC patrol. So this one statement that he gave in front of the board: "You were in the Culleens ambush. Yes. What part did you take in that ambush? I don't know whether I should say it or not, but I shot the 2 policemen that were in it. You were armed. Yes. What had you? A rifle." So this is his death notice in the local paper. And we can see here, now they call it the Curlew ambush, but it's the Culleens ambush. Now the killing wasn't over. So on the 6th of July, to Culleens in Bonnycunlin, just outside Ballina, an ex-RIC sergeant was abducted and shot dead. So in Matt Kilcawley's discussion around this, he mentions Tom Loftus, who was captain of the guard in Leinster House, would know about this. So he did try to escape Foodie, and it was while escaping that he had been shot. They tied the corpse to an ass and they put the ass out on the main road for Ballina. The British military came out from Ballina and they got him. The truce was then only on a few days. Well, that's incorrect, but this is 30 years after. So then I became interested in Tom Loftus. I also became interested in the fact that on the brigade activity report, so if we remember the Culleens one, we have 70 men. On this particular thing, we have none. Okay, so even, you know, over a decade after, this was still very, very sensitive, and they weren't going to say who had killed them. But if you keep digging, sometimes you find. Okay, so here's a report of Anthony Foodie's body being found, and the fact that he had a notice attached to his body: revenge for Dwyer and the Rag. So he had been an RIC man in Tipperary. So then I found the court of inquiry into his killing. And there it mentions again about the Rag in Tipperary. So this is the third witness, John Ruan. It was about 11:25 at night, and suddenly 2 masked men walked in through the open door. They said, "Hands up," immediately. They came up to Sergeant Foodie and asked him if his name was Foodie, and he replied it was. They searched him and then ordered him out of the house. And they shot him, they killed him. So the 5th witness, Sergeant James McCarthy, he states that the next morning he went to investigate and he found Anthony Foodie's body on the side of the road with a label pinned to his coat. He had been shot in the back, and Sergeant McCarthy noticed that Anthony Foodie's clothes were covered with the hairs of a donkey. So now, this is the pension application submitted by Thomas Loftus, and that's his handwriting. Okay, and we can see here, ambush of Towns and RIC at Bonnycunlin, attack on Eastkey and Dromore West RIC barracks, ambush of RIC, patrol and capture of same at Culleens, County Sligo, shooting of Sergeant Foodie, RIC at Bonnycunlin. This is the house that Anthony Foodie was abducted from. somebody still living in that today. That's him. And he was the father of 5 young children when he was killed. And this is about Thomas Loftus, Washington Park, Templeogue, Dublin, who died suddenly last night, aged 71, was formerly superintendent of the House of the Oireachtas, a native of Bonnycondon, Ballina. He joined the IRA in 1917, and in 1921 he was interned, and while in detention at the Curragh camp, went on hunger strike for 41 days. On his release in 1925, he went to the USA, returning to Ireland in 1933, where he joined the Garda Síochána. He became a detective sergeant attached to the special branch assigned to protection of ministers. He was in charge of Mr. De Valera's escort to Britain in 1938 for the signing of the financial agreement which ended the economic war. And that's him. Now, the next man I'm interested in is Martin Brennan. Well, he also took part in the ambush. Okay, and here we have some of his sworn evidence. So he said, they pursued us right into the heart of the Ox Mountains. It was a running fight for several hours that lasted from 12 o'clock till nightfall. Okay. So in the first 70 years of the state, Ireland's censors banned 2,500 films, and between 10,000 and 11,000 more were cut. According to the critic Ciarán Carty, by 1961, Ireland's separate banned book list contained more than 10,000 titles, including works by Faulkner, Sartre, Thomas Mann, Hemingway, and Steinbeck. At the outset, the censors had no background in film. Martin Brennan, the third such appointed in 1954, had had a good war. During the independence campaign, he became a doctor and went into politics. In office, he banned Louis Bunnell's Los Olvidados and Lawton's Night of the Hunter, among many others. He banned Edward Dmytryk's adaptation of Graham Greene's The End of the Affair, citing theological implications which are far above the normal cinema goer's ability to grasp. He also Eucharist, even in newsreels. Now, I looked at one of the films that he had banned, and this is it. So it's Los Olvidados. So it translates into the forgotten. And it's about a group of juvenile delinquents living a violent, crime-ridden life in Mexico, and how their morals are gradually corrupted and destroyed by the violence. So I was thinking maybe it was just a little bit close to the bone. So Martin Brennan had also taken part in the Chathpool ambush. And in this ambush, he wounded Head Constable O'Hara, and he was actually using a pistol that was designed for cavalrymen to kill the opponent's horse. So after the Chathpool ambush, the creameries were destroyed in Tubbercurry, and this is from the schools project. So one of the children was writing about this in the 1930s, and that's Martin Brennan there now. Another man who took part was okay, and he was one of the men who went into the shop and carried out the initial robbery. The other man was Thomas Loftus, okay. So he's describing here his part and that he had fired his rifle. So Jack Brennan went on to play senior football for County Sligo and was chairman of the Sligo County Board from 1947 to 1950 and vice chairman of the Central Council of GIA. He was an umpire at the famous 1947 All-Ireland final held in New York between Cavan and Kerry, and a founder member of County Sligo Races and the Tubbercurry Industrial Association. So here we have a report of him heading off in the boat from Cove to New York for the 1947 All-Ireland. And that's him in 1921. So that's exactly how he would have looked when he took part in the ambush. He was a member of Sligo County Council. Now this is wonderful. This was given to me by my good friend Michael Farry, and this is a copy of the British Army Diary for the day. And in it, it tells us that the owner of the public house is arrested in connection with the affair. The only man to be arrested and imprisoned for the Culleens ambush was the man who reported the crime and was completely innocent. So this is a page from the Sligo jail register on the 11th of August 1921, and there's Thomas Tuffy there. Okay, so I then found his release date, which was the 9th of December 1921. And there he is there. So I was giving this talk last week to the Sligo Field Club, and some of his family were watching. And his nephew told me that on the 9th of December, 100 years ago, the family feared that Tommy Tuffy would be killed on his release from jail. And they could not believe when he eventually made it home to Culleens that night. He died in 1959, and there's practically a whole page there of people saying what a popular person he was in the vicinity and what a well-loved member of the local community he was. That's his grave in the local cemetery here in Enniscrone. And this is the site of the ambush today. So this is where the pub and shop was. And this is where the 2 RIC men were taken after the ambush. So that's the road that leads up onto the bog. And that's Tommy Tuffy. And this incredible photograph, one of the family members got this from America for me. And this is the original pub and shop. And this is what it would have looked like when the 2 men went in and carried out the initial robbery, and then they took over the building. And it's just incredible to see it, because I had a picture in my mind of what it looked like, but to actually see the building itself is amazing. So this building is a little bit different. This is 73 Heytesbury Street in Dublin 8. It would be worth millions today. It's probably in a few apartments, but this also plays a role in the story. I came across this strange story at a Dublin inquest. Strange story was told at the inquest in the Dublin morgue yesterday of Thomas Ray Alvin, aged 23, found dead, shot through the heart in his lodgings. So the witness said that she went out about 3 o'clock and returned at 6:45 when her husband complained of a pain around his heart and lay down on the bed. The witness went to 73 Heytesbury Street for Michael Healy, Sergeant Michael Healy, or ex-Sergeant Michael Healy in 1927, a friend, and returned with him. As they entered the hall, she heard a scream in the room. On entering, she saw her husband lying face downwards on the bed, fully dressed and apparently unconscious. So it appears that he had actually shot himself with a miniature pistol that his wife, when his wife originally saw it, she thought it was a toy. But, you know, thinking about this, I suppose it's the sort of miniature pistol that an ex-policeman might carry for protection in Dublin in 1927. And this is Michael Healy's memoriam card. And this, I was contacted by a member of his family, and she sent me a copy of this. And she said that if we were having an exhibition on the ambush, that the family would be very happy to have this displayed. Sergeant Michael Healy in 1921, I think that this is actually a station in Sligo. Most of these men would have arrived on the scene after the ambush from Eastkey Barracks. So the photograph would have been taken in 1921 for the 1922 calendar. That's Eastkey Barracks as it looks today. And this is Eugene Carley, Constable Eugene Carley. He was badly wounded on the day of the ambush. He was wounded in both arms, and he was awarded £2,000 in September 1921. And when my essay went on the Jackie Clarke website, his grandson contacted the collection to say that you know, the ambush played a huge part in their family's history, and that his grandfather had moved across the border and bought a farm in the 1920s. and he had raised a large family. This is my old friend, Michael Farry. I invited him to the pub and shop, which was the scene of the ambush in 2018, to give a talk on his 25 years of research and publications into this period in Sligo's history. And little did I know that he wrote a poem about it. They were anxious for truth, crammed into the function room of the Hilltop Public House. During the introductions, we heard the commotion, the robbery, the high voices, the cart harnessed, the orders given, but not the quiet creep of armed men, the position taking, the rehearsal of plans. While I modestly listed my achievements, my volumes of hard facts and figures, we heard the first shots, the sharp exchanges between career policemen and unsatisfied young, inspired by the long legend of resistance and the recent bloodletting. In the room, opinions varied, and there were difficult questions. I think I handled them well, skating over the issue of the killings. But as I rambled on towards an agreed ending, we could hear the argument, the pleas, the prayers, and then the final shots almost make out the fall of bodies on soft turf. See the long and difficult years ahead. What could I have said? So this is the, I found the birth registration for both men and the death registration for both men. I also found this recently as well. This is a local woman, Bridget O'Neill, and in her evidence to an application for a pension, on the occasion of the Culleens ambush, she was making up turf in the bog, and she was watching the movements of the enemy who were scouring the country, and she helped men to get away by telling them of the movements she observed. So that most of the civilians on the bog that day would have known the local IRA man. So this is the plaque that was placed on the spot about 15 years ago. And that's what the patrol would have looked like as they set out from the station, the barracks that morning. It's a stunningly beautiful part of the country, and it's a very, very remote area. It's quite a powerful place to visit when you understand what happened there. I just want to acknowledge the support and encouragement I have received from the Tuffy family in Sligo and America. They have assisted and advised me on my research into this incident, and I'm very grateful to them for that. I also want to pay tribute to my two comrades, Linda Connolly, but especially Adele Doherty from Coronara, Foxford, County Mayo, whose father, Tom Doherty, showed me the true importance of remembering when others have forgotten. That's it now.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much for that. It was a fascinating lecture.
Oh, good. I'm glad. It's just very strange. Yeah, speaking to yourself for an hour.
Yeah, it's something that I've never looked at that part of the country at all, to be honest with you. And I think it's great that they have the site marked now. You know.
Yeah.
When did that go up? Or when did they put that plaque up?
That plaque went up about 15 years ago. So what happened was, and when I heard this, Jesus, I was very moved when I heard this. So an elderly American couple called to the pub and shop, and they were asking about the ambush, and they were asking if anybody could bring them to the site. So Martin John Dolphin, they decided to call him, and he came up in like a 4-wheel drive or whatever, and he met the couple, and he brought them to the site. And now, like, I was up there a couple of times, and you know, it's you know, you nearly need a map to find it, or GPS. But anyway, he brought them up, They got out of the van and he showed them where the two men had been shot. And he said that the two of them fell to their knees, started to pray, and they cried. So they went back to America and they came back the following year. They were the only members of the family who had ever visited the site of the killings. And also, one of them felt that they were the only people, that when they died, that there was nothing there. So they came back a year later with about 20 members of their extended family, and they put that plaque there. Now, the plaque is very neutral. It doesn't say, that they were killed. It doesn't say that they were members of the RIC. It says nothing. It just says that they died there.
Right. That's great. Sometimes I think it's people who have left Ireland have more of a want the memory maybe carried on more than people who actually stay. People who, I know up where I come from, there's a plaque at an old church. Well, the church is long gone, but it's paid for by people who went to Australia, and it says paid from Australia, Culleens,
Yeah.
But over here, you sort of look at it and you sort of know it's there, and you just don't take any notice, Maybe it's sort of
Yeah, well,
like
it's
that.
funny because like all around me here, I've been living here now for 10 years, and it's just incredible. Like there are traces everywhere here of what happened, but there's no plaque to say, like, if you're curious, I mean, like even a couple of miles away from where I live now, there is a huge ruin, and it was a Coast Guard station that was burnt during the Civil War. And it's a very, very powerful reminder of what happened here. But you need to dig, to discover, well, what is that ruin? And we have a workhouse here that was burnt during the Civil War in February 1923. And there's a family living in it. But it looks like a ruin from the outside. And I've been in it a couple of times, and it is just spectacular.
So, Liam, do you want to ask a few questions there? Is that right?
Will do, yeah, and thanks for that. And thanks very much, Frank. Absolutely fascinating and brilliant work. I can't believe it's not, an incident that's more prominent in our collective memories of the period. But if you don't mind, there is a couple of questions there in the chat. Banda Burka asks, has the Jackie Clarke Collection, does it have many memory cards or photos of Mayo IRA casualties who died between 1919 and 1923?
Yes. It is the most incredible collection of memorabilia I have ever seen. There's 100,000 items there, like it spans, 400 years, but he had a particular interest in the War of Independence and the Civil War.
Fair enough, absolutely. It's good. It's good, great to have it available. In your opinion, Frank, what were the reasons for the reluctance for those who were involved in the War of Independence or Civil War to talk about the period? For example, Ernie O'Malley managed to overcome that reluctance. Was it different when volunteers were talking to others who were involved, or when they were amongst themselves?
Well, I think now, as Michael Farry has said to me, when he reads Ernie O'Malley's interviews, he can nearly smell the whiskey. And, it's like, it's a very relaxed interview. And also Ernie O'Malley was very respected by the Republicans, because, he was nearly killed, like on Aylesbury Road and that. But also, I suppose they trusted him. And also, like with Matt Kilcoley's interview, it's like 30 years after the event. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, so it's, I can also see that, like the Civil War was bitter in this part of the country, and people, it's very different. I often say to people, you look at the First World War and you look at, the working class men from Manchester or Liverpool that went and fought in France, and then came back to Manchester or Liverpool. Here in rural Ireland, we had neighbours who took different sides.
Must have been horrible, yeah. It doesn't bear thinking about, certainly. Liam O'Sullivan asks, the two RIC officers appear to have been alive briefly after being shot. Is this the case? And do you know why they didn't receive a coup de grace, as was happened in many other similar cases?
Okay, so one of them was killed instantly, and the other he lived for a short while. But you have to understand that at this stage, you know, there's a hot pursuit. You know, there are possibly hundreds of Crown forces in the bog at this stage. And it was only the fact that the volunteers knew the area. They had been training in the area for about 6 weeks prior to the ambush itself. So they knew how to get out of there. But that's why they didn't have the time. But they knew that they weren't going to survive. I mean, one of them.
I don't know. I don't know. Sorry, it's hard to cut across you. Jared Shannon comments that Frank's knowledge of the period of in Mayo and Sligo is incredible, and from personal experience, always a great pleasure to listen to a great presentation. Colin Moore comments, I'll be tormenting you down. I'll be tormenting you down the line, Frank. So on that point, really, regarding World War I veterans fighting with the IRA, from my research, we found 28 British Army veterans were killed during the War of Independence, and many more during the Civil War. So thanks for that, Colin. Thanks for your painstaking research as well. And I don't know if anyone else wants to comment, but I was just struck. I was actually struck by a point myself as you were talking there, as you mentioned. You know, it's hard to believe that the masterpiece, the Night of the Hunter, ran afoul of the film centre. But I suppose a film that had a preacher as the baddie certainly didn't suit the era. But with reference to the film centre censor, I'm always, whenever I go to the cinema, I'm always reminded of the sort of state that was due to unfold after the I suppose if you like, the counter-revolution, from the point of view that it always names 1923 to whatever date it is. And I always feel, so one of the first pieces of legislation enacted by the Free State was, in fact, the film censors. So 1923, when the security of the state in a physical sense was probably, still a risk. The one piece of law that needed to be put through was around our own morals and what we might, terrible things we might see at the cinema. So I just think that's always very indicative of how the rest of the 20th century was really going to go for Ireland. You know, when you see the 1923 date, when the Civil War obviously ending in that year. So that's my own thoughts there. Does anyone else? If anyone else has nothing else, for Frank, we'll extend his thanks to him, and we'll sign off there, I think.
Okay, well, that's great. Yeah.
Sorry, Frank, just one more. In the middle of town there, you showed us a picture of the burnt out house.
Yes.
Right. Is there any plans to get a wee memorial plaque or anything like that up?
Not that I know of. I mean, like, when you think that there were actually 10 people killed at that site, I could not believe it's on the main street. It's like, there's businesses on either side. It's like having a front tooth missing for 74 years. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was astounded, but yet I could see that is what can happen,
Thanks, nuts.
Now, the other thing as well, I forgot to say, there's an incredible radio documentary that was made about the initial attack in Kiltimagh by RTE. It's called The 12th Apostle. Okay, and it's actually about the man who killed one of the Rwans. Okay, so if you go on to the RTE website, if you just Google 12th Apostle Kiltimagh, you'll find a radio documentary that was made about 40 odd years ago, and it's fascinating.
Thank you very much. Liam, do you want to close her up?
You're welcome.
Fair enough, thank you. And there's one last comment there from Cheryl Willis. Great presentation, thank you. So thanks very much for the opportunity, Frank, and keep up the good work. And I'd just like to say a very Merry Christmas to everyone who listens in. We'll catch up with you all in 2022. Stay safe out there, everyone. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Bye bye now. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Good night.